Good morning. I feel so honored, Craig Crawford, to have you as my first guest on this podcast series, where I'm going to explore different angles from industry experts about 3D, AI, in general, digital transformation, and how it changes the fashion industry. What are the challenges? What are the advantages? And how's it going to look like in like 5 to 10 years? So, Craig, I met you 5 years ago. I remember at the PI Apparel in New York, you were sitting on a panel, I was sitting in the audience, and I just remember how you stood out to me because for me, you are such an inspiring person, such a visionary. No, you are really, and at the same time, you're so grounded and you have all of this experience. Like, you've been a digital transformation expert for like nearly 30 years now, if I'm not mistaken. And as the former, yeah, it's a long time. And as the former VP of IT strategy at Burberry, you really played a pivotal role in like driving this digital innovation in big companies. Now you're advising top fashion brands, but also tech startups, and you're leading Differently Enabled, a fashion brand focused on inclusivity and on-demand production, which I'm really fond of. So let's start with talking a little bit about your background and your personal brand. So when I think about you with decades of experience, like you built such a strong personal brand in the industry, what is the secret of staying ahead of this curve? Like, this is really something I asked myself since I met you. Like, what is your secret? So maybe you can start with telling a little bit about your journey from Burberry and all these other iconic brands you worked for to founding your consultancy and then creating Differently Enabled.
Sure. Well, as a friend of mine and I say all the time, you got to have a plan. You start doing things and you change that plan, but you start out with a plan. I actually thought I was going to grow up to be a journalist, and I really think that's because I've always enjoyed learning and I've always been curious. And so I fell into technology through journalism. When I went to the University of Virginia, the daily newspaper, I was told by my mentors, go there, work on the daily newspaper, get experience. It was changing, and the industry was becoming computerized, is what it was called then. And that's with my southern accent, computerized. But I learned how to back up a mainframe computer, and my first job in New York City, they hired me for that very reason. I was always, as I said, interested in fashion, and I did all kinds of things. I modeled, I was a stylist, I worked in retail, I was one of the first 6 people to start Old Navy. I was a designer for the Gap in the beginning of my career in working with big global brands. But I was very curious about improving the technology we were using. I was hired because I could operate the CAD/CAM systems that were brand new and huge, the size of, coffee tables and end tables. But yeah, Burberry was when it all came together. I left design behind when I left the Gap, and I took a position at an American company called Liz Claiborne because I could be in charge of the technology used to design and develop product. And that's how Burberry started. I had worked with Angela Orange. Excuse me. I had worked with Angela at Liz, and she brought me to Burberry. But I started my own consultancy because I wanted to do a blend of creative and I wanted to do a blend of technology. So I worked with Tory Burch when she was a startup, and then Burberry brought me to London. That was supposed to be for 6 months, and I was at Burberry for 7 years, and I've stayed and become a citizen. As I say, I get to vote in 2 elections, and neither one has mattered. But nevertheless, we're not here to talk about politics. But in some ways, we are here to talk about politics. That'll be a whole other podcast. But we are here to talk about politics because when we start talking about what it takes to be successful, there are a lot of internal politics that can get in the way of success at a fashion brand, right? We'll talk about that later. That wasn't the question, but. Yeah, so just always wanting to learn, and we had this North Star at Burberry. We knew that we needed to target the next generation luxury consumer who coming out of India, Latin America, Asia were 15 to 25 years younger than the Western counterparts, and that meant millennials. And that was Christopher's instinct, to make the brand global and relevant to a younger consumer base. And they were digital. The iPhone was invented the year I started at Burberry, and so that became where we were headed. And it was an amazing culture. We allowed everyone to participate. Everyone's idea was important, as long as it tied back to the strategy, as long as it had some benefit to that and to getting us there. Yeah. We didn't just do tech for tech's sake. So I've always looked at technology with what else can it do, how else can it be used, how can we bring it together for the goals of the brand. And it's important to understand what those brand goals are before you go off on a technology journey. So that served me quite well in consultancy, and I'm still teaching people the Burberry case study. I'm still telling them what we're doing. But I have to say, I'm curious and I like to learn, and I've always enjoyed learning. I always enjoyed school. I enjoyed education. I've volunteered and tutoring kids, and have done that here in the UK as well as in the United States. So I'm a firm believer in education. I'm a firm believer in being curious, and having an opinion and forming your own opinion about how things can be and how they are, and talking to other people about that. And that's really important, because that, it's not just my opinion. That it matters to me, but it doesn't necessarily matter to everyone else. But if I share that with someone, then I get their perspective, and that's when the collaboration starts. And so, that's the part I love about what I do, because I travel around the world. I meet so many different people, and at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want to see our companies successful. We want to feel great about our jobs. We want to feel great about our participation in that. And if we don't, then we don't contribute very well, and it just becomes routine. And there's nothing wrong with having a routine job. There's nothing wrong with it, don't get me wrong. But if you're bitter and angry about it, you're not doing a good job.
I was interested in how that passion for inclusivity developed, and how does the innovation go with it, and in general how AI and 3D are contributing in that space. Maybe you can tell a little bit more about that journey of yours.
Sure. Well, right around, March 2020, so when the World Health Organization had just declared COVID a pandemic, I contracted it. We didn't have tests then. And in the United Kingdom, we have the NHS, but they were jammed, and you couldn't get through on the phone to learn anything. I'm fortunate enough that I also have private health insurance, and this is a whole other funny story, but so
we agreed on diverting from politics, Craig.
I know. But my private doctor, she said to me, "No, it sounds like you have it. You're doing the right things. We don't know much about it, but you isolate at home. Sleep, have liquids. You just let your body fight it." I ended up in hospital for 48 days. I was in a coma for 21 of those days, and when I came out of that coma, I had to learn how to sit up. I had to learn how to walk. I had to learn, because your muscles go into atrophy when you've been in intensive care for so long. And I went through the NHS system, so I'm a huge believer in NHS, and they saved my life, without a doubt. But Michael was my main occupational therapist, and he said, the sooner we get you out of your clothes, into your clothes and out of your hospital gown, the faster your healing trajectory will be. And so then I had to send for clothes, because no one could visit. We were all isolated. And, we weren't isolated in the beginning, but there were no visitors, right? I remember when they took us all off of the ward and made a COVID ward. That's how early it was. They learned it was respiratory when I was in hospital. It was still, so that's how early it was, when we wiped everything down, and we had everything delivered, and then we wiped everything down when we got it, right? So I slept through a lot of that, by the way.
But how did that experience shape your view in fashion? How did that translate to fashion? That's really what I find interesting, because all of us we have personal experiences that also changed the way of our career in a way. But how was it for you? How did that impact it?
Well, I'll just be crass and tell you, the first set of clothes I couldn't get into because they were too floppy. and I specifically was asking for certain labels, and I wanted certain sweatpants, and I want, because I'm in hospital and I'm in bed, and I wanted them to be comfortable, but I couldn't get into them. I couldn't pull them over my legs; they would wrap around. So then I set for a second set, and the second set of clothing I couldn't get off in time to toilet. So I mean, I literally pissed my pants, and just as that happened, and I'm like, well, God Almighty, in walks my occupational therapist. And I said, oh, this is great. You just walked in. Well, obviously, I can't do anything. I need to change clothes. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. This is perfectly normal. And I said, what do you mean this is perfectly normal? And he said, well, we've learned you need a fly. We've learned you can't handle a drawstring. You don't have the dexterity to do that yet. But elastic would work. So what we're learning is the type of clothing you can wear. And I was like, what? Because I modeled previously. I could wear anything I wanted to. And it was always the consumer's fault that clothing didn't fit. If you're too heavy, lose some weight. If it's too expensive, don't buy so much. The brand always has a reason why you're not included. And you can do things to be included. That's literally how the industry works. And I was part of that. And didn't realize how arrogant and exclusive we were until it happened to me. And I'm a firm believer that things happen to you for a reason. And again, my life career has not been linear. It's been very much, do this, learn from that. Oh, that's excited me. Oh, look, now, well, wait a minute, I can do. And COVID was a reset for me to say, hang on a minute. Everybody deserves the right to be able to pick out their own clothes. I've been doing it since I was 2. Everybody has the right to pick out their own clothes and to feel good about what they're wearing. And everyone should be able to shop everything. And we know we have size and fit issues. We know we have challenges as brands and getting assortments right and merchandising right and right product at the right place and the right price. And I thought, I left hospital in May, and by December, during like the little mini lockdown that we had, a bunch of us met in our garden. We were allowed to do that if it was for business. And I said, this is funny, it is for business because I'm thinking about starting a label for people who are living with disability, who have restricted motion, who have atypical body morphology. We did our first show. So we started making clothing for brand champions. So we did clothing for people as part of our R&D. So we didn't charge them, and we did a runway show in 2022. But the premise behind what we're doing is using technology, connecting very closely to the consumer to be able to co-create, co-design, and manufacture on demand. And so it's a very different business model, and we've tried lots of technology, and it's not plug and play. This is why no one's doing it. But it's right up my alley of finding new things and enjoying new ways of using it.
And that's why I wanted to have you on this podcast. So thank you for giving me the perfect bridge. I think I would like to shift the conversation a little bit to this topic of 3D, like lately AI is a bit more prominent. We have all of this new technology changing the way we create, and that goes like throughout the whole value chain, like right from designers themselves to production, all the way to visual content production. So for me, I would love to know from you, like based on your experience, like what are the biggest challenges for brands when they're adopting new technologies, such as AI in this case, and especially for visual content production?
Yeah, it's a lot to discuss, because if you've used any of the 3D technology, which has been around since I was at Liz Claiborne, so it's been around, some of this has been around for 30 years, it's still very difficult to use. In the beginning, people would try to determine what 3D package, and they would evaluate each one and get stuck in this sort of analysis paralysis loop. And then I remember a brand that I worked with, I'll be careful not to identify them, but they ended up hiring a demo person from one of the software companies because they just couldn't find people who could master the tech. Has it gotten easier to use? Yes and no. It's still expensive. And my work and my team's work with this technology is proving things that people hadn't even thought about. That it's biased against symmetry. It won't allow us to create people with atypical body morphology. So if you're very small, it says no. If you're shaped differently, someone who has Down syndrome is shaped differently than someone who does not. And so wider midsection, shorter arms, heavier in the neck and shorter in the shoulders, it would say the proportions were wrong and it would fail. And so what the team has done is move things from one technology to the other. So using a suite of things to get things done. When I say things, let's just use our words. Using a suite of applications, some of which have relevance or were designed for the apparel industry, some of which were not designed for the apparel industry, but moving the product and the person, the avatar, through all of these different technologies to get the desired result visually. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate for manufacturing purposes. So it's still a patchwork quilt of solutions that we cobble together, and everybody cobbles together the ones that they know or the ones that they've proven work for that particular brand. But now we have AI, and AI has been coming for a long time, obviously. And you know, I was thinking again in preparation for this. I talked to you earlier about the consumerization of IT. We talked a few years ago about the Internet of Things, about how things would send data to one another. We don't talk about that either, right? But AI learns from all of this and everything that we're doing. So, and we're teaching AI. And what AI allows us to do is to visualize things. But it's very early. It's very early. So, you know, what made AI more accessible, just like we had the graphical user interface, the GUI from Microsoft. I'm so old, I'm not that old, but I'm so early in my use of technology that I had to learn, commands to open Word. I had commands to open, any application. You didn't log on. It was green screen tech, and you had to type code in, right? And then Windows changed all of that. Well, large language modeling has changed AI, so we can talk to the computer, we can write, we can tell it what we want. So those language models are allowing us to communicate with it, so it gives us results back. But it doesn't have a full vocabulary in our industry. So I would argue, okay, maybe by now it's learned what a peplum is. I always use peplum as an example, especially in IT. I ask how many people if they know what a peplum is, and most of them do not. But it doesn't have the large language model around our industry. And so that's still coming. And also it interprets what you say, but it might not be on brand. And so you have to say, let me see another. But it's faster and more realistic in generating visualization for merchandising meetings, for design meetings, and even to put in front of consumers to say, do you like this? Before you then take that paper doll, unpack it, and figure out how you're going to make it, right? So it's not giving you a tech pack. It's not giving you a recipe. It's not telling you how difficult that is going to be in 4-ply silk versus cotton. It's not doing that. It may learn all of that later as we teach it as an industry. It may not, but right now it's not. And we need pattern makers, we need craftspeople, we need product engineers and technicians. And we still need designers. We need people with good aesthetics to look at things, to understand the brand's DNA and how to translate that to the consumer.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't fix anything, but it can reduce all kinds of costs aside from back office operational things if you're a big brand. And many brands have been using it to do that for a long time now, and the longer they use it, the more it learns and the better it gets. But even, e-commerce images, photo shoots, backdrops, lighting, all of that, these things, and even makeup on models and generating models, all of these things are very expensive and take a very long time. I was one of those people, and then I moved from being a model into being a stylist. I know how long it takes to do a photo shoot, right? I know how many people it takes. And then when it's done, you still post-produce it.
Yeah, And I remember, Greg, when I was working for some brands in the past, like there was always this big discussion when you had, for example, a location shoot, you know, oh my God, now we need to like travel to, I don't know, Morocco, and, you know, with all the models, with all the equipment, with a photographer, lighting, like it was an insane cost that you had to invest in order to get there. But at the same time, if you only have studio photos on your website, that can also become very boring. So I think for me, like the most prominent like way right now to use AI is especially in that when it comes to visual content production. Besides, of course, the creativity boost you can get in the marketing department by using it.
But I did, you know, you said something earlier too about, we talked about the expensive photo shoots and all that. I also, the promise of AI not only to be able to help you visualize what you want the brand to represent and the consumer to give you feedback and to take that to a faraway location, but we also can and are starting to now create video. So it's not just still, we're also creating video and shoppable video that allows people to see it and feel it. Fashion is about fantasy. You know, I want to look corporate. That's still an image. You know, I want to be sexy. That's an image. We buy clothing because it's emotional and it makes us feel a certain way about ourselves. Good is usually the way we feel. Whether it's, you know, we want to be sexy, we want to be cozy, we want to be relaxed, we want to be sporty, we want to be sparkly, you know, it doesn't matter. And we all have different moods on what we want to be. And even if you want to be anti-fashion, you're still subscribing to a tribe. Subculture is still a tribe, right? So the undeniable importance of clothing and your identity and what you're telling the world is denied if you just can't pick and choose. And the thing that I'm concerned about with AI is we must accept everyone the way they are. And we don't want AI to start telling people, well, look, you're a wheelchair user, but now in AI you can walk. Who cares? It's not, you know, and when we talk to our customers, you know, you have brown hair, I have blonde hair, you have brown eyes, I have green eyes, you know, you walk, I'm in a chair. It's just another attribute, a physical attribute. They're still here. There's still people here. And AI doesn't have a heart. AI doesn't have emotion. AI doesn't have any of that. And we're not trying to teach it to do that. We're trying to teach it how to represent something that makes us feel a certain way. But it's not straightforward. It's not simple. If you ask it to do something, it'll do what you ask, and you'll look at it and go, well, that's kind of off. And then you have to say, well, I want to see more sunshine, or I want to see the waves not as turbulent, or I want to see the wind not blowing as fiercely. Actually, that model is too shiny, or she's too beige, or she's her face is too pointy, too sharp. I want to soften it. So you must spend a lot of time with it, but and then you must, obviously, as you work with it, then you need higher quality when you're going to use them in front of the consumer, right? It's just like 3D in terms of we can do something that's lower resolution. We would never put it in front of a consumer. We would never put it on the website, but it gives us an idea of how the project is going, and then we go and we refine. And all of that requires computer processing power and, you know, enter in where we are today.
When we think about the future of the fashion industry and how technology is involved in that, where do you see the fashion industry in the future? What are you most excited about, really? Like how brands might use that technology?
Well, I think understanding the customer and understanding their wardrobe, understanding what they're looking for, understanding their likes and dislikes. And it's important to understand what they dislike almost more than it is what they like. So that you don't make the mistake of showing them things that they don't like, and you become more credible. But I think going back to our roots, and that is fashion as an expression of yourself, and allowing a brand to style you or help you see how you can take your existing wardrobe and to style. And I'm not sure how many of your viewers know, but this time last year, Amazon introduced Rufus, which is their personal shopping assistant. It's not just styling, it's about anything shopping. They launched it in the United States for Prime members, and then in the fall, they launched it in the UK. So it's only in the United States and in the UK that you can go into Amazon. It was named after a dog in the warehouse, actually, and you could go and find Amazon Rufus, and then you can say, what are customers saying about this product? Or I would like a pair of pink boots. What do you have available? Or I'm interested in understanding the difference between, this type of lumber and that type of lumber, or this type of lighting and that type of lighting, and actually get recommendations and answers to shopping. So true interactive online shopping. And Google, of course, has launched Gemini, and if people aren't playing with that, you should, because that's where you can go in and ask and get, a lot of times now when you search on Google, you get sort of an AI overview, and sometimes it has mistakes. You must read it, look at it, and then fact check, because I called it out several times. That is actually incorrect, what you've told me. Oh, you're right, I mixed this and this up. Thank you for letting me know. So, it's early days, but I do think interacting with the computer in a human-like way and in a natural way, and shop and show me things is where it's headed. And I think because we're seeing Amazon and we're seeing Google do this already, it's only going to be a matter of time before all brands follow that.
Yeah, I believe so too. It was a huge topic also in my previous few jobs, like when we started exploring how can we get closer to customer, how can we make sure that it's more of a personal experience. I guess that's what it's really about. Not just going to a website, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, where the website looks the same for everyone, or you get the same kind of style recommendation, really, really looking at the customer on an individual basis. So I agree with that completely.
And that's no different than when Mr. Selfridge opened Selfridges, right? He took product that was back. You used to go in and ask for something in a store. I'm looking for a pair of gloves, and then they pull out what's available. Selfridge gave a display. Selfridge curated it. You could then see, you could come in, you could interact. It was an experience. And then you had salespeople who knew you, learned about you, knew you, understood, kept notebooks, told you when things came in, right? We did clienteling at Burberry way back when, I think 2010, 2011, and by 2012 had launched it. And now clienteling is what everyone uses. You don't have a little black book anymore to write down things, or a notebook. You do it all digitally, and that means any store can see what the customer wants. It's the human aspect. It's learning about you and then having dialogue with you. And that's what AI really can facilitate when trained properly, and when we get it up to speed on our industry's language model and understanding that. So and the reason why I say this is because we're not replacing that salesperson, we're not replacing that personal engagement. It becomes a starting point that then a person can pick up, right? People just aren't going to go online and look at everything and agree and buy. They'll be like, okay, that's great. Let me put it on my wish list. Now I'll go into the store. And then they'll go into the store and go, hey, Craig, hey, Charlotte, what do you think? I was just online and these were the recommendations. Oh, well, we want to try it. You want to feel it. You want to know what, So this concept of unified commerce, right? It's only helping to bring that together. It's what's available everywhere. Show me the best possibility. And then I'm probably going to go into the store and have that in-store experience. And when I come into that store, you'll know whether I like tea or champagne. You'll be able to help me with that. This doesn't have to be luxury behavior. This is a matter of, look, I know you like sparkling water, so I've got your water ready. Come on in, let's have this session. Oh, and by the way, did you hear this music, or did you know this? Because when you talk to a sales associate, you don't stick to just the clothing.
But that is the red thread, I feel like, in our conversation today, is that it's a great tool. It can really help us on a day-to-day basis, but it will not really replace that human touch, that human storytelling, that human connection, right, in any way. So I think when we look at technology, yes, it makes our industry faster, like more efficient, more sustainable, it's innovative, all of these great things, and we should implement it, and it should be present in our day-to-day life. But of course, we always need to go that step back and be like, okay, but it is about us.
Yes, because it is about being a person first. It is about being a person first.
I think it's really important also for the listeners to get some advice here, because you've probably experienced some pitfalls, you've probably experienced some success stories. But what are the biggest challenges when you think about implementing new technologies, and how can we avoid pitfalls?
The biggest challenge and the biggest key to success are the same, and that is the people. The people. The technology is, I don't know, yeah, it's 50% of transformation, but, as a very wise young student said to me, I truly think 96% of the technology on the market today is still not fit for purpose. And I burst out laughing and said, how long have you worked in this industry? Because you're about right. We go to market with technology that isn't finished. And then we say we're going to listen to our consumers, and we do or we don't, depending upon who the technology provider is. And we also listen to the ones that have the most money and pay the most because we're commercially driven, right? So, but it's the people, because they need to understand why it's being used, why it's being changed, what the benefits are to them, but they also need to understand what's coming downstream or coming, to them from upstream, I guess, and they need to understand what's going downstream.
Yeah, so it's about change management. It's about like people understanding their role in the workflow and making sure that the technology is implemented correctly to make their lives a bit easier instead of creating roadblocks, right?
And if it's not implemented correct, if it's not built correctly and then implemented, I would say there are two things, right? Building the function and then implementing to make sure it all works and integrates, and flows. If those two things aren't working, then that is a problem, right? But if people aren't using it because they don't understand it, if people aren't using it because they weren't trained, if people aren't using it because it adds a lot of extra work to their task, you need to hear that and you need to listen. If the technology is lacking features and function, you need to hear that too, and that needs to cascade back to whether the technology was built in-house or whether it was an external vendor. So the real success is that feedback loop, and it's no different than a brand today selling something and then having referrals, right? Having user-generated content, having social media, people talking about it and get excited. It's the same thing internally. People need to be excited about what's happening and see the benefit. And if it isn't doing what it should do, then they need to be part of the conversation to say, it's not doing, but I'm still excited because we're fixing it. And we know on Tuesday we're getting this. So let's get our stuff together and go. So it's keeping that motivation and that enthusiasm. And sometimes that falls under change management. And people don't want to pay for change management, human resources. It's your job. IT says, I don't have the budget to do it. It's the business's job to change. And then no one does it. And then you chuck technology out. They're people. If they don't understand the purpose or they don't see the benefit, they aren't part of the implementation, the decision making. And I can tell you a million stories. And I was telling one this weekend. I had a project manager at a company come in and say to me, look, for the first time we have a functional spec signed off. And I said, did this person even read it? Oh, well, I'm sure she did. She signed it. And I said, come into my office. I closed the door and I called.
That doesn't mean that she read it.
It doesn't mean anything in my world. And I called this person on speakerphone and I told that project manager to be quiet. And I said, hey, how are you? So-and-so was just in my office and gave me a functional spec you signed off on. Quick question, did you read it? Oh, good God, no. Well, why did you sign something you didn't read? I wanted to get him out of my office. Now, meanwhile, this project manager was like crestfallen. And we get off the phone, and this user said to me, this member of the community said to me, I know if it's not right, I can call you and you'll fix it. So I didn't care what it said. And so I turned to him after that phone call and said, you see, you're so caught up in the methodology that because somebody signed something, you think it's going to be right. You don't understand what she does, and she doesn't understand why she needs to even look at what you've written down. You need a roadmap to make tech. I get that. But you need another mechanism to make sure you know what she wants, because she's going to hold me accountable, which is fine. So let's look at that functional spec. I'll go through it and tell you whether you've got everything. And here's some holes, here's some this, here's that. But don't get excited about getting a sign-off on a piece of paper, because that's not how the fashion industry works. It just isn't. And I would argue it's the same with everything. When we now look at technology, and if it comes in and it's bad, we just walk away from it. Think about how many apps you put on your phone and then they're gone. You don't use them anymore, right?
I remember that now when I was at the panel for the Berlin Fashion Week, what I said was that I had this amazing mentor, Jesper Reisman. He was the brand director at Vera Moda, and he was my first boss in bestseller. And he sat down with me, I think like first or second week when I started, and he was like, Charlotte, like your job is to really make it go viral. Like, this is the only way it can spread.
Yes.
So that you don't just have impact on the next person you talk to, which is like maybe the manager in the design branch. No, it's really about that design manager then, spreading that word onto the next person, because this is how you make sure everyone gets on board with it. You need to spread excitement. It's not just about pushing technology onto people. It's about like creating that excitement in a way.
It is, but that incitement must be based on trust, right? They must know that if they tell you something is not working, you're going to help make it you're going to be accountable to get it fixed, or give them a timeline on how long it takes to get it fixed, and everyone agrees that it's going to be difficult for 6 months or 2 months or 2 days, whatever the time frame is. So there has to be trust that what they're saying is going to be heard, and it's going to be impacted. It's going to happen, and then the excitement stays there, and they become evangelists.
But Craig, just to wrap this up, closing thought, like, I would really like to know in 1 or 2 sentences, where do you see AI in like 5 to 10 years, and also what is next for you?
Oh. In the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will improve it. I think AI will improve our lives. I think we'll learn more about one another as long as we are honest about in our dialogue with AI and in our conversations. And I think for anyone to understand that, the best thing to do is start using it. And I don't mean just at corporations. You can download apps now at home, and you can look at your best self. I mean, I've played around with some of these apps, and I have friends that will post photographs of themselves in different environments. You can do that now. So, if you're not sure about whether you need to do it at work, do it at home, play with it, look at it. Don't, be part of the conversation, right? Be part of the conversation, and then we'll see where we take it together. But I do think that it will do a lot of benefit and help us in many ways. As far as where I see myself, I ultimately, my plan is I want to ramp up Differently Enabled and be doing that full time, and I want my consultancy to be less, so that I can focus more on this growing brand. And so my immediate plan is raising money for that. And we're lucky to have that government advanced assurance here in the United Kingdom to be able to do that and offer tax incentives to people who would like to invest. And so we're qualified for those programs, and I'm very excited about that. So those are my immediate plans. How that works out, we don't know, but you start with a plan. And
well, I wish you the best of luck for sure with that, because I do love your projects, and I love Differently Enabled, just because you focus so much on inclusivity. I think it's beautiful. So from my side, fingers crossed.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. This has been super fun. I'm really honored that you've asked me to do this and listening to my ramble.
I am honored to have you, Craig. Like, honestly, you've been such a role model for me the last few years. Like, just thinking about technology, and you gave me so much insight in where this industry is going. So, of course, I wanted to start with you. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.